This morning is from the book of Luke, chapter 1, verses 67 to 79. Zechariah, the father of John Baptizer, was filled with the Holy Spirit and prophesied, "Blessed are you, the Most High God of Israel, for you have visited and redeemed your people. You have raised up a mighty Savior for us of the house of David, as you promised through the mouths of your holy ones, the prophets of ancient times, salvation from our enemies and from the hands of all our foes. You have shown mercy to our ancestors by remembering the holy covenant you made with them, the oath you swore to Sarah and Abraham, granting that we, delivered from the hands of our enemies, might serve you without fear, in holiness and justice in your presence all our days. And you, my child, will be called the prophet of the Most High, for you'll go before our God to prepare the way for the promised one, giving the people the knowledge of salvation through forgiveness of their sins. Such is the tender mercy of our God, who from on high will bring the rising sun to visit us, to give light to those who live in darkness and the shadow of death, and to guide our feet into the way of peace."
An old priest walks into the temple to burn incense. It's his turn, maybe his only turn in a lifetime, to enter the Holy of Holies to offer prayers for his people. An angel appears, tells him his elderly wife will have a son, and Zechariah, sensible Zechariah, asks a perfectly reasonable question. How will I know this true? I'm old. My wife is old. And the angel says, because you asked, you won't speak until it happens. 9 months of silence. 9 months to think about what he had said, what he had been told, what was coming. Then the baby is born. They asked what to name him. Zechariah writes on a tablet, his name is John. And suddenly, flood. Words pour out of him. Not careful words, not safe words, but a song that would get you arrested if you sang it loud enough in the wrong place. God raised up a mighty one, Zechariah sings. God saves us from our enemies. God frees us from those who hate us. Listen to what he's saying. Listen to what the song actually means. William Willimon, retired United Methodist bishop, former dean of Duke University Chapel, writes that the salvation Zechariah announces isn't vague, isn't spiritual in some wispy sense. It's pushy, bold claims about God acting in real time against real enemies for real people who are actually oppressed. And then Dr. Willimon asked the question that should terrify any comfortable church. Is the church yet able to proclaim God in action? Not God as an idea, not God as a feeling, but God doing something concrete, specific in the actual mess of history. Because listen, the moment you say God is freeing the captive, somebody has to ask, from what? From whom? The moment you say God is feeding the hungry, you've named the one who's hoarding the food. The moment you say God is raising up the lowly, you've identified the system that's pushing them down. That's not theology. That's politics. That's revolution. That's the kind of stuff that gets prophets killed. Maybe that's why Zechariah couldn't speak for 9 months. Not divine punishment, but divine preparation. Because once he saw that what God was actually doing, once he understood that the birth coming would overturn every comfortable arrangement, would threaten every collaboration with empire. There was no way that the religious establishment could afford to let him name it. Not until it was too late. So let me tell you about the Roman Empire's nightmare. When Zechariah sings about God raising up a mighty one from the house of David, that's sedition. Rome knew exactly what the house of David meant. Kings, sovereignty, political power. When he sings about being saved from our enemies, Rome is the enemy. What he sings about serving without fear, he's talking about a life no longer organized around Roman dominance. This is why early Christianity was revolutionary, not because Christians were nice, but because they proclaimed a different sovereignty. They sang songs that named Romans' power as illegitimate. Then Constantine happened. Christianity went from threat to empire to chaplain to the empire. We stopped singing Zechariah's song and we started blessing the status quo. And here's the painful truth. For progressive Christianity, we're in danger of the exact same thing, just with nicer politics. The United Church of Christ has programmatic priorities. Four of those priorities are strengthen the church, climate action, reshaping the narrative, and decolonization. Mountain Rise checks all the boxes. Open and affirming, justice-oriented, creation care, radical welcome. But here's the question that Will Willimon Focus asked us to ask. But are we proclaiming God in action? Or are we just talking about justice while making ourselves nice and comfortable? Because if God is actually acting, if liberation is actually breaking into the world, if Zechariah's song is actually true, then somebody's life has to change. Somebody's comfort has to be disrupted. Somebody's power has to be challenged. If we're serious about renaming and reshaping the narrative and decolonization, those aren't committee work, my friends. Those are revolution. If we're serious about climate action, that's not just about solar panels. That's dismantling the entire economic system built on extraction and exploitation. If we're serious about radical welcome, we better be ready for actually who shows up and what it means. And the research is telling us what is coming and who is coming. Research tells us something fascinating about who's coming to progressive churches right now. The good news, young adults are returning. First time in decades. Millennials born roughly between 1981 to 1996 and Gen Z born between 1997 and 2012 are showing up to church at higher rates than the older generations. 39% of millennials now attend church weekly. That's up 21% since 2019. But here's who they are. 24% of Gen Z identifies as members of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer community, the highest number in any generation in history. Gen Z women are overwhelmingly pro-choice, feminists, committed to racial justice, and terrified about climate change. They're not going to church to have their hands held and be told everything's just fine. They're coming because they're looking for communities that will actually do something about the world that's on fire. So let me paint you a picture of who might walk through the doors of Mountain Rise. A 28-year-old trans woman who grew up evangelical, who was told she was an abomination, who spent a decade healing from church trauma, who's heard that you are open and affirming and wants to know if you really mean it. A young black activist who's done with white progressive churches who talk about justice on Sunday and maintain all white leadership during the rest of the week. Or a climate organizer in her 20s who wants to know why the building isn't yet carbon neutral. An interfaith couple, one Jewish, the other one considering Christianity, who needs us to stop assuming everyone knows what communion means, why we say kingdom instead of kingdom, what sacrament is. They need plain language, not church jargon. An interracial queer family with 2 moms and a baby who will push back if you use exclusively male pronouns for God. So, are you ready for them? Because here's what I know about Mountain Rise. You're kind. You're generous. You're aging. For the most part, we're all pretty much comfortable around here. The people who are actually coming to progressive Christian churches like Mountain Rise are probably going to make some of us, perhaps all of us, uncomfortable. They're going to ask, why are we still doing the same things the way we've always done them? They're going to challenge assumptions we didn't know we were already making. They're going to require changes that cost us something real. Getting pronouns right every single time, even when it's hard work. Doing anti-racism work beyond just reading the books. Letting go of being the center of attention and sharing power with people who see things differently. And here's a fear I've heard spoken here at Mountain Rise. But we don't want to become a gay church. My friends, here is the pastoral truth. If your welcome has a quota, it's not welcome. It's tolerance with limits. Open and affirming doesn't mean we'll include some LGBTQ folks as long as they don't outnumber us. It means we celebrate when queer families find a home here. It means we rejoice when trans folks feel safe enough to stay. And if that changes us, good news. That's what liberation looks like. Because here's the theological crisis. If we say we want them, but we're not willing to change for them, if we say all are welcome, but it means all are welcome to fit into what we're already comfortable with, then we're not proclaiming God in action. We're just performing progressive politics while keeping everything safe. So let me tell you about someone who understands this. There's a 28-year-old named Vanessa Nakate who understands what Zechariah is singing about. In 2019, she stood alone outside Uganda's parliament with a sign about climate change. Uganda actually doesn't produce much, if any, carbon emissions. Africa as a whole produces only about 4% of the entire global population's pollution. But Uganda is drowning in a climate catastrophe caused by wealthy nations' greed, droughts, flood, crop failures, children starving, people dying. We are facing the same storm Miss Nakate said, but we're in very different boats. She kept showing up. She founded the Rise Up movement. She spoke at the UN. And in 2020, at a climate conference, she was photographed with 4 white activists. When the photo was finally published, she had been cropped out. The only black voice, the only African voice, literally erased. Because she understood what Zechariah and Rosa Parks, what Audre Lorde and Martin Luther King Jr. understood. Silence protects no one. So the crisis is coming, whether you name it or not. But if you name it, if you force people to see what they're avoiding, if you make the comfortable uncomfortable, then at least the truth is in the room. At least God's action has voices naming it. At least liberation has a chance. Which brings us to where we began. We're heading into Advent, the season of waiting and expecting. You're in an interim time, waiting for a new pastor, wondering what comes next. But here's what I believe you need to hear. Your next pastor is going to push you. They're going to ask you to live more fully into your stated values. They're going to challenge you to actually be open and affirming and just not say it. They're going to invite, maybe even require change. And you have a choice to make. You can resist. You can say, we're too old for this. You can say, let the new families do it. You can say, we've always done it this way. Or you can decide that actually proclaiming God in action, actually living into Zechariah's revolutionary song, actually welcoming people who will make you uncomfortable is worth the cost. Because it will cost you something. Liberation always does. Listen to what history teaches us. When Constantine co-opted Christianity, we as a church lost our cutting edge. As I said before, we became chaplains of empire instead of prophets. It's true. Mainline Protestantism is dying. Not because we don't have good theology. We're dying because people can't tell the difference between us and any other nice social club. The research is clear. Young people showing up at progressive churches are hungry for authenticity, desperate for justice, looking for communities that will risk something. Now, they're not asking for perfection. They're asking for courage. They're not asking us to have it all figured out. They're asking us to be willing to change. And so this is the moment of decision. So as we head into Advent, as we wait, wonder, and work, let's be honest about what we're waiting for. We're not waiting for God to show up. God is already acting. Not waiting for permission to change. That invitation is already here. We're waiting to decide whether we have the courage to sing Zechariah's song, to proclaim God in action against real evil, to proclaim God in action for real liberation in real time, to welcome people who will disrupt us, to change the things that need changing, to risk the comfort we've built. Because here's the truth we must face. The world surely doesn't need another church that's nice and comfortable. The world needs voices, dangerous voices, prophetic voices, revolutionary voices, voices like yours, naming that what God is doing, challenging what needs to be challenged, welcoming what empires find nervous. The old priest sings his sedition song. A teenage girl answers with her own. The shepherds run to spread the news. And Luke says, this is what God's reign is going to look like. Not quiet, not comfortable, surely not safe, but alive with people willing to pay the cost of actually meaning what we say. There's no time for a silent night. The question is, are you willing to sing?